Rolling. 5, 4.
This is the video for Lesson 5, Section 3. And we use a measuring point to help us proportion a two-point perspective. Now, I'm not a fan of grids, but there are times when they can come in handy. So this is a typical assignment and a demonstration of a homework assignment that I might give to graphic design students. So I'm going to start by drawing a simple grid in elevation. And this grid that I'm drawing in elevation is going to be 8 squares, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 squares deep, 4 squares high. And I want to use this grid to transfer a complex drawing or a complex object to perspective. And what I'm going to do for the complex object is simply write my name. So I'm going to take Jack and try and fill up the grid. And what I want to do is take my name here and transfer it to perspective. I've got a horizon line set up in my drawing, and I've got a vanishing point on the right, and we'll talk about the left vanishing point in just a minute. Now what I want to do is create a grid 4 squares high, 8 grids deep in perspective, and I will set up a perspective drawing, and I want to make my perspective 4 squares high. And if we go back to the previous lesson, we learned how we can expand a square. So 4 squares high, and this is 2 squares long, my elevation. I want to do the same thing in perspective. So if I start with a square right here, an opposite corner from the direction I want to expand it through the midpoint, continuing up to an extension line and down. We covered this in detail in the previous lesson. I have transferred proportions of my elevation to perspective. And now what I want to do is transfer the grid to perspective. Well, it's pretty easy to do. Since I marked off the leading vertical edge, I can divide it into 4 sections vertically. And now I want to divide it, 4 sections horizontally. I now want to divide it into 8 sections vertically. And to do that, I will use the measuring point technique. So from the end of my elevation grid through the end of my perspective, I will continue a guideline up to the horizon line. And that point where my extension line here intersects with the horizon line is a measuring point. And I can use that point and extend guidelines to my grid elevation, and it will transfer the grid from elevation to perspective. Now, as I said, I'm not a fan of a grid, but there are times where it does come in handy. So let's run the vertical lines now on my perspective. And you can see these vertical lines as they go from the front of the perspective to the back appear to get closer together. And that's just perspective convergence. All right, let's start by putting my name now, or let's finish this up by putting my name in perspective. So the first starting point of the J is about 2.5 squares from the leading edge, and I can see it's going to end right about here, and I will just draw my J. It comes up and it's going to cross right about here in perspective and continue up to the 3rd square right here. So I will just run that up. The A is going to come down about halfway and be pretty close to the leading edge of the J. This will cross, the A will cross this point and continue up. My A continues just a little further. Let's bring the C down. And now we're going to bring the C up to about the midpoint, and there will be just a little loop on the top. The bottom edge of the C will come back into this grid square, and the K is going to come up right about to here. The K back will come right below the midpoint, touching the 1, 2, third line over, 1, 2, 3. It's going to come right about to here. The K is going to come up into here. The loop of the K will come back about to the middle of the line. And then I can do the tail end of my initials and bring that up right about to here. And I've transferred a elevation to a perspective. And if I'd want to add depth, I can create another perspective point and sketch in depth to my drawing. And I'm not going to complete this whole thing, but you kind of get the idea of how I would be able to complete the drawing. So again, there are some instances, especially when you're doing a complex object, where a grid can come in handy to transfer it from an elevation or plan view to perspective.